Welcome back to the Let's Talk Football podcast, where this is going to be all about the Champions League Final that's coming up between Paris Saint-Germain and Inter in a game that I'm so excited for, in a game that I feel highlights the beauty of football in more ways than one. I feel two completely different styles, two brilliant managers. I mean, PSG's transformation this year, it's funny because, just to talk on them first, before they beat Manchester City in the group stage, that practically secured them a playoff place. I think they weren't doing great in the group stage, and obviously they were dominating Ligue 1, and I think that's to be expected with the investment they've had. But I think something changed from that game. I think the belief, the confidence, I think the intensity that the manager gives, I think that's a really underrated aspect in Luis Enrique, who, I know there's that famous video of him with Mbappe when he says you need to defend like a lion, you need to lead from the front. And obviously, with Mbappe leaving in last summer, he felt like he needed to go in a different direction. I think PSG obviously were glittered with superstars from the early days of when Nasser Al-Khelaifi took over and put in that investment. They had Ibrahimovic and Cavani. Verratti grew into a top player. They then brought in the likes of Neymar, and Mbappe obviously grew into that. Messi joined, they had Di Maria, and it obviously would never worked. They got to the final under Thomas Tuchel in 2020, didn't get that over the line, and I feel in a footballing sense that's always been the ultimate goal for PSG. That's always been the end, the pinnacle, and they haven't been able to do it thus far. But I think getting there this season and the way they've done it, I mean, some of the football they've played has been incredible to watch. I mean, it makes you fall in love with football again. And I've, in fairness, been one who has criticised the way football has gone, and I've not been a fan of how robotic and how rigid it's become, where every team tries to do the same thing, or we don't give the freedom and we don't give the responsibility to the stars anymore. We try to shoehorn them into systems. We try to force them to stay in position or stay in a particular zone in the pitch. And I think that takes away from that individualistic beauty that has existed in football for so long. And PSG are one of those teams that I feel, and Luis Enrique, giving all credit to him, I feel has given that freedom to his attacking players, especially, to say, go and win us the game. Go and be free. Express yourself. Whether that's not just through tricks, and that's not, through dribbling, but it's that ability to allow players like Kvaratskhelia, players like Ousmane Dembele, who's had a terrific season, and we feel like a breakthrough for him, and players like Bradley Barcola and Doué, to just go and get the ball and work your magic. Go and express yourself, and I think it's been unbelievable to watch. I remember watching the first leg they had against Liverpool, and honestly, it was one of the best performances in 90 minutes I've seen in a long time in the Champions League. And they somehow didn't get it over the line. And then there was obviously the questions and the doubts. Is it happening again? Is PSG as usual not being able to get it over the line in Europe? But I think Luis Enrique has instilled this courage and this identity in this team that they were never going to back down. And I think it showed straight away in that second leg at Anfield, where they obviously scored very early, and Dembele, who I will touch on, so instrumental for them. all season in all competitions, really. And I think that really put Europe on notice for the first time this season, that PSG were different and PSG were serious this time around. I think obviously there's been so many of these questions about the hunger for PSG, with it being commercially driven and economically driven, and not prioritising the football aspect of it. PSG are a massive club, let's not get it twisted, but they have faltered in Europe. And I've got down a few things on both teams here that I really wanted to highlight. Let's talk about Ousmane Dembele, who's he has been sensational. And when you watch him, he's still got that electric pace and electric energy about him. That speed over the first step and his ability to beat men. Obviously, he's played all across the front line, so he's shown his versatility this season. But I think what's really stood out for me is his maturity and his willingness to be a leader and his leadership qualities. And I feel, like I said, with Mbappe, Enrique's really managed to extract that out of him and really managed to, help take him to a new level this year. And obviously there's been talk about the Ballon d'Or and could it be his if he wins the Champions League. I think there's a few players in that discussion, but I think that's one thing I've really been impressed with Ousmane Dembele this season, is his maturity and his willingness to do defensive work and willingness to put the yards in and willingness to press from the front for his team. And it really sets an example for the younger players like Adoué and like Barcola, who are really coming into their own at the top level. Dembele scored 8 goals in the Champions League this season. He scored against Liverpool in both legs. Sorry, not in both legs, in the second leg. Obviously scored that important goal against Arsenal at the Emirates. And it's just been a brilliant season for him. But I also wanted to talk about the other players that obviously will be important in this game. Kvaratskhelia has been fantastic since he joined in January from Napoli. He's eligible to win 2 league titles, isn't he, this year? And he could potentially win the treble with PSG. So I think he is one, he's reminding people of his talent. I think he's a joy to watch. He really brings back that street football element when you watch him, when he dribbles with the ball. He's so direct, and I think that's so lacking in a lot of wingers nowadays. I think ones that come to my mind, obviously Salah, who's obviously become more efficient this season, but when he was in his peak years, or when he was in his peak athletic years, let's say, he was one of those who was so direct, always driving at his defender. I think Saka is another one who's like that, and Kvaratskhelia. But it's just his combination of speed, his dribbling, his precision, and then the quality to match. I remember that goal against Aston Villa in the first leg, and who does that nowadays? The ability to just switch it onto his left and then to find the finish into that roof of the net. It was a wonderful goal, and I think he's another one, along with Desiree Doué and Barcola, who have really impressed this season. But again, not to just touch on the attacking players, obviously they are the ones who make the difference, but also talking about it in the other box, Donnarumma has had an unbelievable campaign, especially in the Champions League for PSG this year. And he's had his doubters and he's had his, questions asked about, is he at that level? Is he at that world-class level? And, in fairness for me, I don't think he is quite at that top level of the likes of Alisson, or that consistency over a season, multiple seasons, where he's managed to produce year in, year out. We know he's got a mistake in him. And we've seen that, to be fair, in the Champions League, where he has made a few errors that he probably shouldn't have. But I think some of the saves he's made, have been unbelievable. And likewise for Jan Sommer, who I will talk about as well for Inter. But Donnarumma's really shown up when PSG have needed him, and when they've been under pressure, he's kept them in games. He's kept them, whether it's being in front or kept their aggregate lead. You know, thinking back to the second leg at Anfield where they were under pressure from Liverpool and against Aston Villa, and that's them two superb saves at the Emirates to keep the lead and take the lead back to Paris. I think he's really proven himself as a leader and one who his defenders have confidence in, that when they are under pressure and when they do need to do some defending, he has been there and he has stood up for them. I think that's another interesting point for PSG. I think, like I said, they've always had questions and the doubts, and can they stick it out when it gets tough, and can they remain resilient? I think there were still questions about this going into the second leg against Arsenal, and I think despite them having the lead and despite all the quality they've shown this season, I think that was still a question mark. Can they remain robust? Because there was no doubt Arsenal were going to come out looking for an equaliser early and looking, to put them under pressure. They really showed that resilience and that robustness defensively to stick it out and keep the lead and enjoy that defending when they needed to. Marquinhos, another one who, goes under the radar just because he's not an attacking player, but I think his captaincy, his leadership, his experience has been so crucial for a young team this year. Likewise with Donnarumma, who, both have played in huge games and both have got that big game experience. I think those two will be crucial for PSG if they are to lift the trophy tonight. I also think, just touching on that midfield, Vitinha, wow. There's so much to like about this PSG team, but he is fantastic. He is so elegant on the eye, never loses possession, keeps things ticking for PSG, and he will be massive. Coming up against that, let's say 5 midfield of Inter, if you want to call it, or, coming up against the 3, his ability to just keep play ticking and break lines with his passing, keeping that rhythm, I think he's such a joy to watch, along with João Neves and Fabio Mauriz, who I think goes under the radar out of them 3. I think after a fantastic Euro campaign last year with Spain, I think he's really stepped up in the second half of the season, especially. Obviously, he got that huge goal against Arsenal in the second leg. Not just about that, I think his general quality is fantastic. And yeah, I think PSG have got a real chance in this final. I think this is the best chance, obviously, they've had in this era. And I think a lot of credit has to go to Luis Enrique, has to go to the president, also has to go to Luis Campos, the strategic advisor who, has overseen this change in strategy and overseen this change in ethos and identity and bringing in the youth and being smart in the transfer window and really, bringing about this change at PSG that's seen them go back more to their roots, I feel. And I think, it's been brilliant to watch. PSG have been fantastic, and I think they thoroughly deserved making it to the final. Now, just talking about Inter, listen, they are one of my favourite teams in world football, and I'm not an Inter fan, but as an Italian, I follow Serie A and I keep a keen eye on that league. I love its heritage, and Inter Milan and Simone Inzaghi are just a side that I find brilliant to watch, and they're not potentially as pleasing on the eye as PSG or as fluid, but they're fluid in their own way. Obviously with that 3-5 back system that he's made so famous now, Inzaghi at Inter, is so complex and just so different to anything we've ever seen in that mould. I think they're brilliant to watch also. I'm going to toot my own horn here a little bit, and I've backed Inter from the very start. I said at the start of this year, I thought last season, I believe they got knocked out by Atletico Madrid in the round of 16, and I thought that was a real underperformance in Europe, considering they got to the final the year before. I think the experience they have, and it's something I've questioned throughout this campaign, where that was one of my doubts, where I thought, do they have that depth to go all the way and compete with the sides, the likes of Bayern Munich and Barcelona? But I think it's just that collective identity they have. Against Barcelona, when going to the second leg, where I thought, one thing I do feel that could be their undoing is their lack of, that star quality and that lack of like a moment of brilliance that can just change the game, that almost came through Lamine Yamal from Barcelona, or Rafinha, or Pedri doing something brilliant in midfield. And I feel that's where they may have just lacked individually. And that's probably somewhere I underestimated Inter and that collective unit that they are defensively. And then when they do counter-attack, they're so efficient and so ruthless. They get numbers forward. The wing-backs are so important in this system, going both ways. And I think Lautaro Martinez, wow. Just to talk about him, he's probably not had as good a season individually as he did last year. He's got 22 goals this season in all competitions, but he's got 9 in the Champions League, and he's really, really stepped it up when Inter have needed him in these knockout games. He scored in each round, and I think he's really grown as a captain, and he's really grown as a leader. And it takes me back to the second leg, I believe it was, against Barcelona, where he wasn't 100% fit, and there was questions about whether he would be playing. He starts the game, he scores a superb goal, and obviously I believe it was a thigh injury, and then obviously he had to come off. But I think that sign of leadership, and I can't imagine it wouldn't have inspired or pushed his teammates through, just to see their captain do that. And I think he's really grown in that element. I also want to shout out Marcus Thuram, and this is a piece of business Inter. I will touch on it. He's one of the players they've brought in on a free, along with Zielinski, Mkhitaryan, Çalhanoğlu, Taremi, since Inzaghi's come in. And they've been so smart in the transfer window, in the market. Steals like that have really gone under the radar, but have really helped to grow a unit. He'll really help to grow a collective identity at Inter. Not to mention losing out their key players like Hakimi, who they're going to play, Lukaku, who obviously came back then on loan, and then obviously is at Napoli now. They lost out to Onana for 50 million euros. Brozovic, who was an important piece of the team that went to the Champions League Final in 2023. But Marcus Thuram, just touching on him, he's only got 4 goals in the Champions League. But, it's not just about his numbers, it's his work rate, his energy. I think he played 120 minutes in that second leg against Barcelona and never stopped running. And you could tell he was gassed by the end, but I think he's a fantastic player and another brilliant addition to this side. And he pairs up so well with Martinez. They just contrast off each other. I think they've grown to know each other's movements and each other's habits, and I think we've seen that over the past 2 rounds in the Champions League, especially against Bayern and against Barcelona, where they've really connected well. I think it was the second leg against Bayern Munich in the quarter-final where, Thuram and Martinez, they linked up beautifully together, and then obviously Martinez finished it off brilliantly. That was a brilliant goal that I rank as one of the best in the Champions League this season that I've seen. But I don't know what it is. I think Inter Milan, I still think they've gone under the radar this year. I think they've been underappreciated for their quality. I think nobody expected them to maintain this level of consistency over the whole season, not just in the Champions League. Obviously, they lost out in Serie A and in the Coppa Italia. They were on for a treble, but he shouldn't be sniffed at the job Simone Inzaghi has done. He's one of my favourite coaches in Europe. I think he's outstanding. I think the levels he's managed to get this Inter side to on a consistent basis, getting to the second Champions League final, reinvesting in the squad, and then talking about his his philosophy and his way of playing and his ability to find solutions. And there's no doubt he would have been working night and day in the lead up to this final, looking for solutions against such a problematic PSG team who are so fluid, who are so unpredictable. And listen, I don't think they will be able to stop PSG from creating chances, if I'm being honest. I think this PSG team are so fluid and so cohesive in attack, and where they rotate constantly. Where Kvara might start on the left, he'll go over to the right, and Doué likewise, and Dembele will shuffle across or drop in like he did against Arsenal. I think it's going to be a really, really fascinating game to watch. I think it's one that I think could be one of the great European finals, and I really, really hope, and I don't think it will be the case, and I really have this feeling inside of me that I just don't want it to be a final where either manager or either side pull their punches. I want them to go for it. I want it to be an open, expansive game. I want there to be goals. I want them, to show the beauty of that these two sides have shown throughout this season. I think that's something that I've really, really loved. Likewise with Barcelona, who have just been so expansive and so unafraid to go for it, and unafraid to go for the attack and in the forward areas, and to allow their forwards and allow their wide players, whether it's in Inter's case, their wing backs, to get forward and get in the box and provide numbers. I think it's been really, really refreshing to watch in a period of football that, I've seen that side of it diminish, and I think seen too much of the game micromanaged and seen too much of the game controlled by certain managers or certain systems. Whereas these two sides in particular have really allowed their forward players, or allowed all of their players in general, like Inter, for example, they're so fluid and so flexible. We've seen Bastoni go from his position in that left slot in the back three to charging down the left-hand side, and I think it's brilliant to watch, and it's so refreshing to see new coaching ideas, but to see them in a way that doesn't deny their players of getting forward and being expressive. And I think that's why these two sides are in the Champions League final. I think, like I mentioned in the Barca-Inter semi-final, either one of them merited to get to the final. And I think likewise in this final, either one of these sides will merit the final. And obviously it will come down to who delivers on the night. But I think they're both worthy finalists and both worthy winners based off of the seasons they have had. I've been torn about who I think will take it, and I will go with Inter, and I will stick with them. I have gone with them all year round, and I won't veer away from that. But PSG is such a brilliant team to watch, and such a joy to watch, really, in this modern game. I think as brilliant as Inter are tactically and defensively as a unit, I mean, they are the best defensive team in Europe. I think they will find it very difficult to deny PSG avenues and ways in to create their own chances. But I think Inter will be a real threat on the counter-attack. I can see this game going similarly to the Barcelona game with Inter, where PSG will have a lot of the ball, but Inter, they're content to be without the ball, and I think they've shown that on numerous occasions. They killed Bayern Munich on the counter-attack in the quarter-final, and they punished Barcelona multiple times with it as well in the semi-finals. So I think Inzaghi and his side won't be too disheartened by that. They can control games as well, and they can keep possession effectively. But I think it's whether or not Inter can make the most of their chances on the counter, and whether or not PSG can get the ball into their forwards as soon as possible. That'll be an interesting battle to see how Inzaghi sets up his defensive system and his defensive back five against such dangerous wingers like Kvara and like Desiree Doué. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I think it'll be a brilliant game to watch. I'm going to go with Inter, but I think it'll be a game for the neutral, and it will be a spectacle, and hopefully there will be a lot of goals in it. So that's where I'm going with it. The Champions League final. This is a brilliant game, and that's all for now on the second episode of the Let's Talk Football podcast.